I was 32 and going through a divorce when I started spending my evenings at the Riverside Public Library. I could not stand being in the apartment alone, and I did not have anywhere else to go. My lawyer had advised me not to contact my ex-wife directly, and most of our friends had chosen sides. The library was open until 9 on weekdays, and it gave me somewhere to be that was not home and not a bar. I usually sat in the same area on the second floor, in the literature section near the back corner. There were 4 armchairs arranged around a low table, and the area was always empty in the evenings. The chairs were old and deep, upholstered in dark green fabric that smelled faintly of dust. The overhead lights in that section were warm and dim, not the harsh fluorescence they used in the rest of the building. I would bring my laptop and pretend to work, but mostly I just sat there trying not to think. The second floor had a particular quality of silence that I found comforting. It was not the aggressive quiet of the main reading room downstairs where people studied. It was softer, more like being underwater. The carpet was thick burgundy pile that muffled footsteps. The shelves were tall and close together. Sometimes I would sit for 2 hours and not see another person. On a Thursday in late September, I was sitting in my usual chair when I noticed someone had left a book on the table. It was a hardcover copy of The Great Gatsby with a teal dust jacket. I picked it up to move it aside and saw that someone had written in the margins. I opened it to a random page and found neat pencil annotations running down the side. The handwriting was small and precise, and the notes were not the kind of thing a student would write. They were personal observations, reactions to specific lines. I flipped through more pages. The annotations continued throughout the entire book. On page 47, next to a description of Gatsby's parties, someone had written, "This is what loneliness looks like when it has enough money to hide itself." On page 93, next to a line about Daisy's voice, they had written, "She knows exactly what she is doing, and that makes it worse." I sat back down and read through the book slowly, paying as much attention to the annotations as to the text itself. Whoever had written them understood the book in a way I had not when I read it in high school. They saw the cruelty under the glamour. They recognized how the characters were all performing for each other, desperate and hollow. The annotations felt raw, like reading someone's private thoughts. When I finished, I checked the front of the book. There was no name written inside. The library barcode was on the inside back cover. I looked at the due date slip. The book had been checked out 2 weeks ago and was not due back for another 2 weeks. I left the book on the table and went home, but I kept thinking about those annotations. The next evening I went back to the library at the same time, around 6:30. The book was still on the table. I picked it up and read through it again. This time I noticed details I had missed before. The annotator had underlined certain phrases multiple times. They had put question marks next to others. On the final page, next to the last line about boats beating against the current, they had written nothing, just a small dash, as if they had started to write something and then stopped. I took the book with me to the circulation desk downstairs. The librarian was a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a chain. I asked her if she could tell me who had checked out the book. She said that information was confidential. I explained that I had found the book with annotations in it and wanted to return it to whoever had written in it. She looked at me for a long moment, then told me that writing in library books was against policy and that she would make a note in the system. She took the book from me and scanned it. Then she set it aside in a bin labeled damaged materials. I felt a strange sense of loss watching her put it in that bin. I asked her what would happen to it. She said it would be evaluated and either repaired or removed from circulation. I wanted to argue, but I did not know what to say. I left the library feeling worse than when I had arrived. That weekend, I could not stop thinking about the annotations. I kept remembering specific lines. This is what loneliness looks like when it has enough money to hide itself. I wondered who had written that and what their life was like. On Monday evening, I went back to the library and searched the literature section for other copies of The Great Gatsby. There were 3. I checked each one carefully. No annotations. Over the next 2 weeks, I started checking other books. I pulled classics off the shelf at random and flipped through them looking for handwritten notes. Most were clean. But then I found a copy of Mrs. Dalloway with annotations in the same handwriting. The same small, precise pencil marks. The same kind of observations that felt almost too personal to read. Next to a passage about Clarissa preparing for her party, the annotator had written, "She has built her entire life around surfaces because the alternative is unbearable." Further down the page, "Everyone at this party is performing, and everyone knows it, and no one can stop." I checked the circulation history on the computer terminals. Mrs. Dalloway had been checked out by the same account as The Great Gatsby. I could not see the name, just an account number. I took the book to the circulation desk and asked the same librarian if there was any way to contact the person who had checked it out. She recognized me and looked annoyed. She said no. I asked if I could check out the book myself. She said yes. I brought it home and read it cover to cover that night, following the annotations like a second narrative running parallel to Woolf's text. The annotator seemed to identify deeply with Clarissa's sense of fragmentation, her feeling of being separated from her own life by a thin membrane. They wrote, "Sometimes I think I am only real when I am alone, and even then I am not sure. I became obsessed with finding more. Every evening I went to the library and searched the shelves systematically. I found an annotated copy of The Bell Jar, then one of Revolutionary Road, then The Awakening, all in the same handwriting, all checked out on the same library account over the past 6 months. The books were always novels about loneliness, disappointment, and people trapped in lives they had not chosen. The annotations were always perceptive and always sad. I started to feel like I knew this person. I built a picture of them in my mind. Someone isolated, probably around my age. Someone who read to understand their own unhappiness. Someone who needed to write their thoughts in the margins because they had no one to say them to. In mid-October, I found an annotated copy of The Age of Innocence. The annotations in this one were different, more frequent, more emotional. The handwriting was still controlled, but there were places where the pencil had pressed harder into the page. Next to a passage about Newland Archer realizing he will never escape his life, the annotator had written, "This is exactly how it feels. You see the cage clearly, but you cannot make yourself leave it because leaving would mean admitting you built it yourself." On the last page, tucked into the back cover, I found something new, a piece of paper torn from a small notebook. On it was written, "If you are reading this, you have been following my books. I have seen you in the library. Same chair, second floor, literature section. Thursday, November 7th, 7 p.m. I will be there." My hands were shaking when I read it. I checked the date. November 7th was 3 weeks away. I read the note 5 more times. "I have seen you in the library." The thought that this person had been watching me the same way I had been following their annotations made my chest feel tight. I went to the library every evening for the next 3 weeks. I sat in my usual chair and waited, hoping they would approach me early. But no one ever did. The second floor remained empty except for occasional students passing through. I brought the note with me every time and read it over and over. I tried to imagine what this person looked like. I imagined different versions of the conversation we would have. November 7th arrived. I got to the library at 6:30 and sat in my chair. I had dressed better than usual. I had rehearsed things to say. The library felt different that evening, the air heavier. I watched the entrance to the second floor and waited. At exactly 7 p.m. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. I sat up straighter. A figure appeared at the top of the staircase and walked into the literature section. It was a man, probably in his late 50s. He was thin and wore a gray cardigan and glasses. He looked tired. He walked directly to where I was sitting and stopped a few feet away. He said, "You have been reading my annotations." I said yes. My voice sounded strange. He nodded slowly and sat down in the chair across from me. He did not look at me directly. He stared at the floor between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I need you to understand something. I am not looking for a friend. I am not looking for someone to save me or to understand me. I left that note because I wanted you to stop." I felt like I had been hit in the chest. I started to say something, but he held up his hand. He continued, "You have been taking the books I annotate. I have been checking the circulation records. Every book I return, you check out within a few days. You are following me." I tried to explain. I told him I had not meant it that way. I said I felt connected to what he had written, that his observations had helped me feel less alone. He listened without expression. When I finished, he said, "That is the problem. You think this is about connection, but I write those things because I have accepted that I will always be alone. That is not an invitation. That is a statement of fact." He stood up. He told me he had already asked the library to flag his account so that the books he returned would be immediately pulled from circulation and placed in storage. He said the annotations would be erased and the books would be reintroduced after a month. He said I would not find any more. I asked him why he wrote in the books at all if he did not want anyone to read them. He looked at me directly for the first time. His eyes were gray and empty. He said, "I wrote them because I thought no one was reading them. That was the point." He walked away. I heard his footsteps going down the stairs and then the sound of the front door opening and closing. I sat in the chair for another hour. The library closed at 9, and a staff member came up to tell me I needed to leave. I went back the next evening and searched the shelves. All the annotated books were gone. I checked every section, pulled every classic I could remember finding notes in. They had all been removed exactly as he said they would be. I stopped going to the library after that. Not immediately, but gradually. I would tell myself I was too busy or too tired. The truth was I could not sit in that chair anymore without feeling the weight of what had happened. I had mistaken someone's private desperation for an invitation. I had turned their loneliness into my own entertainment. My divorce finalized in December. I moved to a smaller apartment across town. I pass a different library now on my way to work, but I have never gone inside. Sometimes I think about those annotations. This is what loneliness looks like when it has enough money to hide itself. I think about how he had been watching me the same way I had been following him, and how we had both been wrong about what we were seeing. I think about the fact that he had been coming to that library for months, writing in those books, believing he was invisible. And then I appeared and took that invisibility away from him. Last week I was in a bookstore and I picked up a used copy of The Great Gatsby. I opened it hoping, absurdly, to find his handwriting. The margins were blank. I bought it anyway. I have been carrying it with me, but I have not read it. I am not sure what I am waiting for. Permission, maybe, or forgiveness, or just the courage to write something in the margins myself.